Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week, a plunge into the anti-crime, infrastructure, and education legislation moving through the Capitol. And
you have lots of people living amid an awful lot of natural gas wells, and those natural gas wells have a long history and documented history of leaking.
The environmental implications in the push to make our state a hub for hydrogen production. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. The largest budget in state history is moving forward in Santa Fe. The proposal is advancing towards a House floor vote and calls for nearly $8.5 billion in spending. We're going to dig through what all of that money will go towards, including a package of new anti-crime initiatives like an office to help prevent gun violence and money for police departments around the state. All of that on top of 3 new bills aimed at better deterring and punishing certain crimes. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our 3 line panelists this week. We're joined by Rebecca Latham. She is CEO of Girl Scouts of New Mexico. And attorneys Sophie Martin and Ed Perea. Both, we really great to see you all virtually anyway, as we're taping here on this snow day this week. All right, money is clearly the weapon the state hopes does the most damage in the fight against crime. Millions of dollars are tabbed for police departments around the state, both for pay raises and expanded recruiting. A recent study from the Legislative Finance Committee suggests the state is failing to create the certainty of arrests shown to create a significant deterrent to crime. Is addressing that fact the main priority for the governor and lawmakers? And Sophie, let me toss that to you too. It's a very complicated question, but let's just start broadly here. What's your thought there?
Yeah, I mean, clearly crime is a top priority for the governor in this session. I mean, remember that that we're in one of those years where the focus of the legislature is pretty tight, and that the governor can ask for additional initiatives beyond sort of the economic. But so when you say money is the tool, well, this is the money session, right? And so we would expect that. But there is quite a lot coming forward a lot of it from Democrats, which I think makes sense given the governor's priorities. And it covers a broad range of areas from, on one end, looking at pretrial detention and what's happening under that constitutional amendment that was approved several years ago to protection of judges in New Mexico and trying to keep crime from subverting the judicial process overall. So we have a lot to look at this year.
And it's going to start to parse out here this week and this weekend, and next week's going to be very busy for sure. Hey, Ed, included in House Bill 152 is a one-time payment of $10 million to Bernalillo County, and some of that money has been quoted going towards behavioral health issues. And the county tells KRQE specifically it would fund training for officers to better respond to mental health crises. It would also fund more health clinics. We've been waiting for this for a long time here in the county. In fact, voters approved some money for this some years ago. It hasn't really been spent. So my question, is this the right school of thought when it comes to finding long-term solutions to the crime problem?
There are multiple component parts to addressing the issue within the criminal justice system and those that support the criminal justice system, and definitely mental health, behavioral health. Those are critical issues, especially when you look at some of the data that I've seen out there, that a huge percentage, I'm thinking in the area of 60 to 70% of those incarcerated had some mental health issues. So I think if you're looking at those kind of numbers, that in itself is telling a story that if we're able to reduce some of the mental health issues that lead to criminal behavior, that it may have an overall reduction in crime. I think that's, and I don't want to say a good start, because this is something that our community and communities across the state and country have been working on, and we realize that that's a problem. So this is just another piece that I think will help contribute to our efforts to start to reduce crime. So I think it's a positive step.
Hey, Rebecca, interestingly, there's a controversial tweak to the pretrial detention process. We've talked about that a lot here on the show, certainly. It's made it through one committee. That's despite some skepticism. The bill would force defendants to prove they aren't a danger to society when requesting pretrial release. Boy, this is a big one for some folks, and especially for conservatives. Is this too much of a risk, given it could be ruled unconstitutional, especially?
Well, I think it's important to note that that this is, House Bill 5 is a bipartisan bill, and so they're working really closely together to try and get ahead and acknowledge that there are some constitutional issues with this bill, and even going so far as to saying, potentially making a constitutional amendment, taking it to the voters so that it has, if they make changes to this, to pretrial detention, that it has a much more, a better chance of actually lasting. Whatever they come up with, I think, that it's great that there's huge packages of crime bills. A lot of them are so much about, increasing the penalties for this or that, they're larger deterrents. But in New Mexico, catch and release is a household term, not like Tingley Beach catch and release. We talk about catch and release for dangerous criminals. So this is something that is widely known in New Mexico. It's not just us that are talking about it. It's criminals that know there's no teeth, that they're going to get in and they're going to get right back out again. I heard Raul Torres speak a few, I guess probably about a year and a half ago, and he gave the parallel to parenting a toddler. If your toddler does something that they know is bad, and you say, okay, I'm gonna punish you right, I'm just gonna take this toy away, and then you come back 10 months later and try to punish the toddler for that offense, it doesn't work. That's not how parenting works, and that's not how criminal justice should work. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are some other things out there, but I think we've got to find and pressure our legislators to find solutions that will work right now.
Rebecca, let me ask you, keep you here for a quick sec. Is the idea of stricter gun laws, you just mentioned gun possession charges especially, is this a meaningful deterrent? This is a big debate over years that criminals really don't care what the deterrence is to having a gun. They just want a gun for whatever reason. What's your opinion on that?
So never having been charged with a criminal gun thing, I can't speak for everyone, but to me, it feels like, what good is the larger penalty? What good is the stricter penalty if they don't think it's going to stick? If they don't think that there is really a danger that they are going to be arrested and put into jail and separated from their families, and all of the things that the criminal justice system was it's not just the penal system was set up to deter. If they don't think they're going to get caught, then what difference does it make? A first degree this or a fourth degree that? If it's not going to stick, then I personally, I don't think it's enough of a deterrent. But again, that's just me.
Sure, that's why we have you. It's your personal opinion, no worries there. Sophie, interestingly, the movement in recent years on police reform, I'm very interested in your opinion on this. Are any of these measures, how much should Democrats here locally be leaning into that at this point, under this idea that we're now tackling crime? Do those two things fit together?
I think they do. And actually the bill that Ed was talking about earlier regarding mental health support and support of our social services and behavioral health, I think that is actually a signal. It does include training for police officers. And so it feels to me like that's part of a movement toward, yes, intervention in how policing happens, how policing works, with more of a more nuanced view of what's happening in the criminal justice system. So I'm not 100% sure I've answered your question, but I definitely think that bill in particular is geared toward what a number of reformers are trying to get to.
Ed, let me take the same question. Defund the police, let's just put it out there, all the things that have been out there in the public's purview for a long time. Then we do this big turnaround and it's time to get tough on crime. And I'm saying this is how some people hear this out there, so to speak. Again, same question to Sophie. How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, and I think when you talk about defunding the criminal justice, not defunding police, I think you really need to define your terms as to exactly what that means. The police need resources to do their job, to be effective to do their job, and so defunding in itself, in its pure term, to take money away is something that I'm sure a lot of law enforcement agencies would reject, because it then doesn't allow them to do the work that they're tasked to do, which brings up another question: what are they tasked to do? And
Right.
sometimes they're being overtasked, and so we need to continue to take a look at what law enforcement is expected to do and create a balance, and maybe continue to parse out some of those tasks. And I think the Mayor Keller and his team has created this community service agency that is trying to do just that. But I think when it comes to crime prevention, I think there is a balance. Crime prevention is probably the key component. If we're effective at preventing crime, there really isn't much need for enforcement and prosecution. So prevention is going to be a key component. And we follow this: prevention, intervention, enforcement, and prosecution. The more we prevent, the less we'll need resources on the other end. But right now we're in a pickle because we haven't done a great job at preventing crime.
Right. Rebecca, give you the last cut at this. I'm curious, kind of looking ahead a little bit, is there a danger for Democrats if what gets passed out of this session just isn't tough enough for a lot of people?
Well, we are seeing an influx of non-New Mexicans moving into New Mexico because they see that we are a superior state to live in as far as quality of life goes. And so, like it or not, they're coming from other places outside of New Mexico, and they will register to vote here. And if they, as well as those of us who have lived in the state and been born and raised in the, like overwhelmingly, we will get to a point, if we haven't already gotten there, that lawmakers, elected officials will be called to task for not figuring this out. We've had this crime problem. This is not new. And ultimately, as we've seen even in local school board elections recently, like big flips, we will see flips across the board if the public feels like it's not being addressed effectively.
Right. Good point. Good last point there. Thank you all to the line panelists. In less than 10 minutes, we'll discuss a package of proposals aimed at making public education more equitable for Native American students.
More often than not these days, a state-by-state competition. Companies want to locate in a place where they have this infrastructure in place. I mean, we talked to business owners across the state that said our lack of broadband is inhibiting their growth as a business.
A push from Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham to make New Mexico a leader in hydrogen has hit a bit of a snag. The House Energy and Resources Committee voted to table the Hydrogen Hub Development Act. The bill would create and incentivize hydrogen development and storage here in New Mexico. Now, one of the goals is to revitalize fossil fuel facilities in a long-term switch to more renewable energy. But is there enough science behind these promises? Environmental correspondent Laura Paskus talks with a journalist who's been covering these issues for years. Here's Laura and Jerry Redfern from Capitol in Maine.
Hydrogen hub, where is this idea coming from? It just seemed like all of a sudden there was all this talk around hydrogen hubs. Like, why?
That's a pretty good question, because I think, again, there are a couple of different angles that are coming together in dealing with this. I think, well, to be blunt, the main reason is that in Joe Biden's, the first of his Build Back plans, he offered up $8 billion with a B dollars to build up to 4 of these hydrogen hubs around the United States. And, our legislators in Washington and then folks back at the Roundhouse and in Santa Fe saw that and said, oh, hey, we could do that. We should step up and do that sort of thing. The other side of it is that hydrogen as a fuel on a global scale is really seen in many quarters as a replacement fuel for, say, regular gasoline or diesel fuel in heavy machinery and manufacturing processes, where you can turn these very, very dirty manufacturing or transportation processes into much more green things. And that's seen as being very important, globally. So people do want to get this hydrogen going. The big question is how and where. And then the other thing that goes along with that is that, at least in the United States for sure at this point, it takes a fair bit of subsidies to make it profitable for businesses to do this. So all of these things sort of work together to point to New Mexico.
So it sounds to me like when you burn it as a fuel, it's clean, but like the production of making the hydrogen is maybe not so clean. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, the main concern is the pipeline that gets natural gas into a thing like a power plant or to a distribution center, because of problems New Mexico's historically and continues to have with leaks and such from natural gas production from the well to the production facility.
I wonder if, if you've heard conversations around winners and losers when it comes to hydrogen, like maybe there are some winners who get to use that cleaner fuel, but losers on the production end in terms of, increased natural gas production or emissions, or have you heard conversations like that at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. These sorts of externalities that are involved, in particular with natural gas production, have all sorts of people up in the San Juan Basin in particular very nervous and unhappy about the prospect of this showing up in their backyard. The San Juan Basin has been economically depressed for several years, and I think that a lot of, shall we say, economic leaders in that neck of the woods, which tends toward natural gas producers and people affiliated with those things, they're very excited about this possibility of restarting the whole natural gas industry up there and getting it chugging once again. But the problem is, if you drive around up there, you see pretty quickly that you have lots of people living amid an awful lot of natural gas wells, and those natural gas wells have a long history and documented history of leaking. And that creates, global climate issues, but it also creates health issues for the people who live right there on the ground. And those people who live right there on the ground, those frontline communities, are not even a little bit, many of them are not even a little bit excited about having that start up again in force.
Yeah. So the governor's Hydrogen Hub Development Act, can you explain what that bill was and what we saw happen with that last week?
Well, we should say was with an asterisk, because, and I'll take that sort of backwardsly. It was up for debate in the House session, which is where these things normally start. And after nearly 4 hours of back and forth talk about it, which was kind of interesting, I'll get back to that in a second, the legislators didn't actually kill it outright, they tabled it, which does allow the possibility that it could be rewritten, it could be rejiggered, it could be brought back up for debate down the line. But since we have this very compressed session that's supposed to be devoted to monetary issues, that looks probably unlikely. So put that to the side for now. So it's probably dead, but we don't know if it'll come back like some sort of hydrogen zombie. That remains to be seen.
Thanks to environment reporter Laura Paskus and to Jerry Redfern from Capital One, Maine. You can watch Laura's full interview online right now. Just search for Our Land on our Facebook page. Now, turning to education, legislators in Santa Fe are considering new strategies in response to the 2018 Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. A judge ordered the state to make public education more equitable for minorities, particularly Native American students. A trio of bills would pour $70 million into changing lesson plans and creating more programs for Native students. After all of this time, Ed Perea, do these bills go far enough? Very simple question to start us off.
No, is a short answer. Do they go far enough? I think there's so much more that needs to be done. The Martinez Yazzie lawsuit really. I was a member of the Martinez side that helped facilitate the lawsuit, and so I'm very, very familiar with the issues that came up as a result of this lawsuit. And I know the Yazzie team has been doing an exceptional job on their end, really trying to promote the needs of the interest of Native Americans. And I think that's highly critical. I think we need to continue to do that and maximize our efforts to do that. There is, however, the Martinez side that we really need to place a focus on as well. In this legislative session, we're hearing a lot about the Yazzie piece and the monies and revenues and funding that's going into Native American needs, which is critically important. Don't want to take anything away from that. But we're not hearing as much from the Martinez side. There are critical needs on the Martinez side as well that is being overshadowed And so, I would encourage the legislature to continue to work together to collaborate so the needs of all New Mexicans on both sides of the lawsuit are met. Special education is a critical need. I know there's funding on the YZ piece to address some of the special education needs on tribal lands, but outside of the tribal lands, there are many special education needs as well that need to be addressed. And we could go back to the crime and crime prevention issue. These are all crime prevention, public safety matters as well. So I'd like to hear a little more from those legislative Martinez proponents and put a few things forward that are going to support the Martinez side of that lawsuit as well. Again, going back to the short answer, is it enough? No, more needs to be done.
Absolutely. Rebecca, interestingly, State Rep Derek Alente, Democrat from San Diego Pueblo, as you know, he says it's more than throwing money at the problem. He's behind the 3 bills, by the way. I should have mentioned House Bills 87, 88, and 90. He says the legislation was strategically crafted to address prioritized needs, areas of need. Is it worth the delay, knowing that this was the approach when drafting these bills in the first place?
Well, I think it's important to note that he pushed some bills in the last session that didn't go very far, and he's taking ownership and saying, I learned a lot from that. I didn't do enough to build a foundation. But I really have to applaud Representative Lente for acknowledging the fact that we cannot just throw money at a problem and expect it to change. I do personally feel like this is the right direction to go, to Ed's point, to address this specific student group. I feel like if the state were best equipped to provide culturally appropriate educational standards for Native American children, then the state wouldn't be in this position in the first place. Like, I agree that there are cultural things that we have to empower our Native American community to do its best for their students. But also, with that being said, it's not responsible to just say, here's money and let us know how it all works out. Or to Ed's point, wait 20 years to see if anything has changed and then say, oh, we can point back to this. I would caution Lente about, or not, just the legislature in general, trying to have some level standard of what the agreement is. He mentions that there will be an agreement between the state and between the tribal communities. And we've seen in the past that sometimes that happens where every tribal community has a different agreement. And so I would suggest that we just look at a standard across the board. This is what we expect, and this is how the children will benefit. These are the metrics. Having that be standardized to the best of their ability so we can really measure it.
Interesting points there. And Sophie, let me kind of put some numbers. Representative Lente says it's about more than money, but there is a lot of money connected to these efforts. And House Bill 87 would appropriate $20 million from the state's general fund to the Indian Education Act to provide educational funding for the tribes. That will be starting in 2024 to create culturally relevant learning programs, et cetera. Now, House Bill 88 would appropriate $21.5 million to help tribal education departments develop learning plans and such, and that would take place in 2024. And House Bill 90 has a price tag of $29.6 million to 4 state colleges and 3 tribal colleges for 53 initiatives, such as building a Native American teacher pipeline, which of course is critically important. So it's really not about the levels of money. Is that what we're saying here, that the levels of money were matched to a need? Is that appropriately put?
Well, let me start with this. It's not enough money. I appreciate that the legislature is working with what I'm sure they think they've got, but we're talking about generations of underfunding that we're trying to, that they were hoping to overcome. So something like 20 million, 30 million, this is a drop in the bucket, I think, compared to the need. Now, it will fund some really important initiatives. The idea of building the pipeline of Native American educators is huge. Will there need to be more money to sustain that and to support it? Yeah, I mean, I even to the extent that some of these funds are recurring funds, looking to build capacity, et cetera. We can't sort of think to ourselves at this moment, 3 and done, right? To Ed's point, we have an entire, additional section of the population that we need to focus on, the Martinez side of the suit, but also I really feel like this is small given the scale of the problem, and I applaud Representative Lente for getting the ball rolling. I think we have to assume that there's a lot more to come in order to sustain and build upon any advances that happen over the next couple of years as a result of this funding.
Mm-hmm. You know, Ed, to Sophie's point, Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero, she's right here in Albuquerque, as you know, a Democrat. She said the very same thing. We're talking about getting after generations of inequity here with this money. It can only be, and I don't want to speak for her certainly, but it can only be seen as maybe the beginning of something more. But money issues are always problematic. How do we wind our way through this discussion about how much is too much, how much is not enough? It's a tricky one.
That's right. I think, and going back to Rebecca's point, is we need some matrix to determine whether what we are doing is effective or not. Because I agree with the others that we just can't throw money at a problem. But what are the matrix? What are the deliverables? What we hope to accomplish, and how are we going to measure it? And we can't measure it in one generation, because this isn't a singular generation issue. It's a multi-generational issue. I had a conversation a while back as we were discussing the lawsuit, and I recall talking to the president of the organization at the time, and reminded her that the conversation that her and I were having is a conversation that I remember in high school way back, decades back, and we keep talking about the same problems over and over again. But what are we doing? So we want to be very careful just about not throwing money at the issues, and make it clear that we have clear deliverables and matrix to identify whether we have, if we're improving in the various areas, and if we're not, then we need to change things up. And so, yeah, I think we need to continue to look at how funding is being appropriated, and ensure that it's not a one-time thing, and that this continues to go on, reoccurring year after year, to ensure that we are moving forward with the shortcomings that we have in our educational system.
That's right. You know, Rebecca, on the Senate side of things, we have a memorial, for what that's worth, out there now. I mean, which asks the state public ed department to develop a comprehensive plan to address the needs of the student groups tied to Yazzie Martinez. But more importantly, and we just got a minute here, an annual report to the legislature about the plan. Does that ring your bell appreciably? I mean, a plan's a plan, but
yeah,
how do you make that?
It's funny. I actually have that highlighted and circled with a frowny face on my notes.
No kidding.
because a Senate memorial is synonymous with unfunded mandate. And any memorial is unfunded mandate. They're saying, we want this done, but we're not going to put the resources behind it to do it. If it was something that they really thought needed to be done, then they should have made it a bill, and they should have put some appropriations behind it. But I think it's discouraging. It's concerning that these three specific bills are the only bills addressing Yazzie Martinez in the session right now, in a session where we're just supposed to be talking about money, but we're also talking about other things too. And I think it is, again, unrealistic to think that the Senate would say we're going to have a memorial and then ask you to put together a plan that we're not going to provide you the resources to do, we're not going to provide you the expertise to do, and then you need to come back every year and report on how the plan that we didn't fund is going, and where's the execution behind the plan. Now, I will admit I am a fan of plans, because I don't like the idea of throwing money at something and not knowing what you're going to do with it or what it's going to cost. But this also seems kind of like, well, we're going to make a gesture and we're not going to think it through.
Thank you all for that discussion. That was really interesting. We'll check back with you once more to talk about how New Mexico involved in an investigation into false 2020 election certificates filed in favor of Donald Trump. Now, but first, a peace of mind discussion with Terry Bruner, someone who's been around governmental spending for decades, as many of us know. His nonprofit called Pivotal New Mexico just released a study that details the shortcomings of our rural infrastructure and the systemic issues that continually stand in our way when we try to secure funding for new improvements.
Interestingly, what the theme that really comes out in this report is there's a lot of issues here, deferred maintenance issues, the fact that we have not invested in our infrastructure for too long. Now we're playing catch up. And I realize a lot of folks are probably going to get hung up on the costs of these things. So I want to start somewhere philosophically on this. It really is a situation that we can either pay to catch up, or we can just pay forever to never catch up, isn't it? Now is the time to strike, it seems to me. This is what the report is saying.
Yeah, you have the money in the bank now to make a giant impact on the deficit we have, in a sense, in broadband and water and sewer. So yeah, you'll never quite always catch up because things need to be repaired and everything. But we have not been strategically on top of taking care of all these needs in the past decade or so. So we have a bit of a lag.
In the report, it makes an interesting case that if you
dollar, you're going to get back a bunch more than that down the road within 20 years. I think that would be news to most people when it comes to investment.
Well, you mean that the investment pays itself off in the long run?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all of this stuff we talk about in infrastructure are really the building blocks behind a successful educational system, public health system, economy, all those types of things. When you're not deploying these needs at the rate you ought to, you're taking away from the potential to have that growth. But if you configure these systems in a smart fashion, you're going to reap a return on them.
Let's talk about the legislature. Obviously, they're going to have a pretty heavy hand in how this all works out. Governor Lujan Grisham has announced that former Albuquerque Mayor, someone you know well, Marty Chavez, is now the infrastructure czar of a sort. I'm curious to your opinion on the need for that. Is that the appropriate way to go, to have one person at the top of it sort of overseeing, or is there a better way, or what's your sense of it so far?
Well, what we call for is really kind of having a committee led by the governor's office that is constituted of that consists of the heads of agencies to talk about infrastructure. But given that we're in this kind of emergency or last, rapid deployment of infrastructure funds, I think the governor's assembled kind of an all-star team to come in and help. So, nobody knows municipal infrastructure better than Mayor Chavez. And, they've got Mike Hammond, the former director of the Bureau of Reclamation, Bianca Ortiz-Wertheim, who's Senator Udall's former chief of staff. They've got a new broadband director from the state of Illinois. I think the governor has been wise to bring in these experts to help deploy these funds. But in the long term, really, what we call for is for the executive and the state, the governor, to convene a group that's meeting on a regular basis to hack out all the different infrastructure issues we have.
One of the lines here that really caught my eye and should catch anybody's eye if they read this report, and I'm going to encourage our viewers to do so. We'll have a link in the thread below. That there was the Business Roundtable in an infrastructure study found that for every dollar invested in infrastructure, delivers $3.70 in economic growth over 20 years when factoring in household income and other economic indicators. That, to me, Terry, seems like, if you're going to think long term, how do you pass that up? Right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I don't know how we pass it up. I mean, we're not even talking about the fact that when you do an infrastructure project, you're hiring people to do the construction, they're buying supplies in the local community. You're doing all sorts of good. And I think the problem is infrastructure is just not a sexy topic, and it's not forefront on people's minds. And so it often gets, left behind. And it's more often than not these days a state by state competition. Companies want to locate in a place where they have this infrastructure in place. I mean, we talked to business owners across the state that said our lack of broadband is inhibiting their growth as a business. And so, if we want economic development, we got to have broadband that's competitive. And right now, we are the least competitive state with our broadband.
Terry, one of the difficulties I'm sure you guys have talked about is how to get all the local agencies on board and going in the same direction, because we have other entities out there like the PRC. They're going to be critical in all these decisions. What's your sense of how you're able to get everybody in the room, so to speak, and getting moving in the same direction in New Mexico?
Well, I mean, that all comes down to leadership. I mean, somebody has to decide in the state they want to take this on and start leading on this issue, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the PRC is kind of off doing its own thing. The Environment Department's doing another, the Department of Finance Administration is doing another, and the legislators are doing something with their capital outlay. And it really calls for somebody to wrangle all these cats and get them together to figure out how we're going to do this in the right way. I've seen that done in the past. I mean, prior administrations have figured that out. But I understand we're in the middle of a global pandemic. There's a lot of challenges right now. So infrastructure, again, might not get the attention it needs, but really for the long term, the time is right now to set up the systems we need to start planning more responsibly on this front.
Thanks again to Terry for that conversation. It was terrific. You can catch that full interview online right now at the New Mexico in Focus Facebook page. A shakeup in another state agency has caught our eye. The New Mexico Game Commission has been around a long time, more than 100 years. It sets rules for hunting and fishing, but also much more, as our guest, Jeremy Vesbach, explains. Mr. Vesbach was the vice chair of the Game Commission until just recently, when he was removed by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. This week, he talks to environment correspondent Laura Paskus.
Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks, Laura. I'm really glad to be here. Excited to talk about wildlife today.
Thanks. So you were until recently on the New Mexico Game Commission, and I just want to start with some basics. What is the New Mexico Game Commission?
Well, when I was still on there until a couple of weeks ago, I took to calling it the Wildlife Commission because game has become a little bit of an outmoded term to a lot of people in New Mexico, but it really started in 1921, 101 years ago this year, to protect the wildlife species in New Mexico. And at that time, the major threat was unregulated hunting, that we'd had commercial hunting. And so to kind of get that under control, create science-based wildlife management, people at the time really rallied to create a system that brought science forward, but also brought public input forward, and created what's called the New Mexico Game Commission to oversee the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, which is our state wildlife agency.
Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham recently removed you from the Game Commission, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But the commission focuses, a lot on hunting and fishing, but there's also some other issues that affect kind of everybody or the public as well. Can you touch on some of those? Like, for instance, I remember the state's participation in the wolf reintroduction program. Is kind of an issue that draws a lot of attention whenever that comes up. But what are some of the other ones?
Well, sure. Yeah, there's a State Endangered Species Act, and the Department of Game and Fish is the one that is responsible for recovering species that are in trouble. And that can be everything from the Texas hornshell mussel to the lesser prairie chicken to gray wolves, the Mexican wolf in New Mexico. So setting those habitat conservation plans, going out, getting public input, making sure everybody's voice is heard, but that science is really the driving force as well. And so what the Game Commission does is we'll set rules and regulations around, take of animals and habitat projects, how we spend money to restore habitat and bring back species. So it's really, I'd say the Game Commission really serves three critical purposes. One is protecting people's voice, that decisions are made out in public. The commission meets due to the Open Meetings Act. They cannot predetermine decisions. When I was on the commission, I couldn't call up other commissioners and say, hey, I think we ought to vote this way. What do you think? That's a rolling quorum. You cannot try to line up all those votes ahead of time. You really want to preserve that decision making in public, so you hear people's voices and get a chance to make that. And the other things are really to serve as a shield so that wildlife management does not have a political swing up and down, where you have people who are appointed, they serve terms, they have to be bipartisan. You can't have there's 7 commissioners, you can't have more than 4 from any one political party. And they're supposed to serve across terms of governors. So governor appoints them, confirmed by the Senate. It's sort of like if you think of the way the judiciary system is supposed to work, where you have people who are qualified, appointed, and then work on creating those rules and regulations, but with a lot of public input. Mm-hmm.
So one of the issues that I've been hearing about is stream access. And if I have this right, in 2018, there was a new rule that allowed people who own land next to a stream or a river to petition the Game Commission to close access. Am I explaining this right, or what's the deal with this rule?
Yeah, you have it right. I mean, it was, and even stepping back from that rule a bit, we had a law student at University of New Mexico that wrote an opinion and said, hey, 2 state agencies are interpreting stream access differently in this state. The Environment Department is giving guidance to people who want to go float New Mexico's rivers and saying, not only can you touch the bottom of the stream when you're floating, if you hit an obstacle, a tree or something, you have a legal right to go around that and portage around it, because our water is publicly owned and you have a right to float it. And if you touch the bottom in the incidence of that's okay, you know. But the game department, which, you know, I was responsible for overseeing there for a period of time, they just told people you can't touch the bottom, and they gave a completely different guidance. And so the law student at the time said they thought the Environment Department was right. And so Lucky Varela, who was a representative who grew up in Pecos, he asked for an opinion from the Attorney General and said, who's right here? The Attorney General, again, kind of sided with the Environment Department idea, but the administration at the time did not pass the rule that would have been back in the Martinez administration, like you said, passed a rule that landowners could petition to close off sections of stream. And so when I came on, that rule was still in place, and we had several petitions come in, and we ended up denying those petitions. We didn't think that that it was right to close those streams based on the facts of the case. And the Supreme Court has now taken it up. They're the right entity to determine constitutionally, is there a right to travel along our public streams or not? And so they will take up that position now. But the landowners who had petitioned for those, you know, obviously had very strong opinions, and but there's a lot of public input as well on it.
So, like I mentioned, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham recently removed you from the Game Commission. What were you told, and why were you removed from the commission?
Well, I wasn't given a reason. I had a year left in my term, and I got a short letter that said that the governor, that I have the authority to remove you, and therefore I am removing you. And, you know, my take is that it was because one of the landowners in particular who had petitioned, who had really started this drive to petition to close off streams, was a large political donor. And, you know, when I got on the commission, I was there to serve the public, not to serve anybody's political interest. And I was not willing to kind of go along with what a certain landowner would want. And that's I would say that, you know, we have this amazing heritage in New Mexico where, you know, we have public lands, public waters, and our wildlife, like we talked about, is publicly owned. And there is a push to privatize, to, you know, make that access, not shut it down, but make it so that the wealthiest, most privileged get that access, and that the general public doesn't. And that goes to some of our hunting rules as well. And I just, you know, I really believe that we have to preserve that equal access for the public. It's this incredible heritage we have. And so, you know, when I went into the commission, I thought, well, I'm not going to change my values for that. And I do think that's the reason I was removed.
Getting ready to talk to you, I looked up on the Game Commission's website, and there's only 4 commissioners currently listed. Yeah,
that's a bare quorum. So, you know, if one person didn't show up, they couldn't even hold a meeting now. And our hunting rules and regulations go on a 4-year cycle, so they have to be set. So the governor is going to have to appoint new commissioners soon, because, you know, we won't have hunting seasons. You know, won't be able to go forward without the commission there to kind of set those rules.
Yeah, and even though you're not on the commission anymore, I know you've been active on these issues for a long time and paying attention to the commission for a long time. What do you hope? What do you hope that commission can be? Oh yeah, well, you know, there was, like I said, it's 101 years old, and you look back to the history, and there was 2 calls when the commission was created. One, it was get the game department out of politics, and I think that still stands true today. We have to restore that political shield. And commissioners were not supposed to be removed without cause. That was never the intent. But there was a court decision in the Richardson administration about a completely different kind of commission, the Judicial Standards Commission. And Richardson had removed just everyone. And there was a lawsuit, and the court ruled that if there's not a very specific process spelled out to remove a commissioner for cause, then they serve at will. And so I would say that would be similar to, you know, if you had justices who could just be pulled back off the court if the governor didn't like a decision they made. You know, so it's no longer serving that political shield. And I think updating that law is super important. It's kind of restoring the original intent, but
but with new ideas, new science. I think it was, like we said, we still call it the Game Commission, when in reality it's a Wildlife Commission now. And so we need to update that. And then the other part of that I think is really important is it was to protect all the wildlife of New Mexico was the rally cry. And there was another court decision back in like the 50s that said reading Supreme Court decisions isn't usually super exciting and fun, but this one is a little hilarious. The justice who wrote the state Supreme Court decision said that we can't let the commission protect any wildlife species it want. My God, they could protect jackrabbits and say jackrabbits are a game species. Well, now we have an endangered species of jackrabbit, the white-sided jackrabbit that the commission is doing a lot to try to protect. And so restoring that original intent, we have just a patchwork of protection. Some reptiles are protected, some kinds of birds, but we have species that are in need, that are declining, that the commission cannot necessarily protect. So I think the legislature, I would say, needs to take action on two things, that just kind of restore the original intent with new knowledge, and that's that commissioners can't be removed without cause, because you do need that political shield. And then for wildlife management, so science guides it, but we have a lot of public input. And then the other part is, kind of modernizing that it's not just about game species, that it really acknowledging that it's all our wildlife, that the Game Commission or Wildlife Commission is responsible for overseeing.
Right. Well, thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thanks. It went by quick. Thanks, Laura.
We asked the governor's office for comment about Vestbach's removal from the commission. Press Secretary Nora Myers-Sackett said there was a, quote, disagreement of mission, end quote, unrelated to stream access. She said the governor respects and appreciates Vestbach's, quote, dedicated years of service and advocacy, end quote, and said they plan to fill the outstanding vacancies before the next Game Commission meeting. We called the department to find out when that meeting will be held. It'll be sometime in February, but right now, there's no date. All right, another political disagreement may have turned criminal. A U.S. House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection has subpoenaed more than a dozen people. It says falsely tried to declare Donald Trump winner in key states, and that includes New Mexico. According to recent reports, Mr. Trump's then attorney, Rudy Giuliani, led the scheme. Let's get to our line panelists. Rebecca Latham, how much of a black eye is this for New Mexico?
I think it's weird. It's I think it's horribly embarrassing. Personally, what the root cause of it was it just to cause disruption, confusion, or if it was genuine belief that Trump did win the election in New Mexico? It seems bizarre. I will give credit to New Mexico and I think it was Pennsylvania who did put a caveat in about that this was, they're sending this falsified document, sending this letter as a just in case. And instead of other states, I think Nevada actually sent 2 different documents that were both from the Republican Party. So the whole thing, it smells like a Da Vinci Code style, coup. It's bizarre, and it has been really interesting to see how it's playing out in the national news.
Hey, Sophie, one of the electors from New Mexico says that GOP chairman Steve Pearce directed him to falsely give the state's electoral votes to Donald Trump. I got to just flat out ask, is this a disqualifying discovery? I mean, seems pretty serious to me.
That's a big deal, and it does seem like the subpoenas are really focused on trying to figure out who was behind these activities, where the direction came from, the path which they traveled into the various states, leading to these namings of false electors, et cetera. And so Steve Pearce's involvement, of course, if it is true, is going to be very interesting to the congressional committee focused on January 6th, which is who has issued these subpoenas. It's interesting, it sort of feels, picking up a little bit on what Rebecca was saying about how New Mexico and Pennsylvania submitted these kind of just in case letters. You know, there's this meme on the internet that's like, mess around and find out. But messing around and finding out can have real legal consequences. And I think that although, you know, at least one of the members of this group, Jewel Powdrell, has said he has no regrets whatsoever, we're going to see whether charges end up being filed against folks, against these 5 and potentially more New Mexicans who were involved.
Who are the 5, by the way?
All right, I'm gonna list them out for you. It's
Okay.
Jewel Powdrell, who's a retired businessman from Albuquerque. Deborah Maestas is a former chair of the Republican Party of New Mexico and was deputy campaign manager on Alan Way's Senate campaign back in 2014. Lupe Garcia is a business owner in Albuquerque. Rosie Tripp is the national committee woman for the Republican Party here in New Mexico, and well known, of course, from her elected positions in Socorro County. Anissa Ford-Tinnen, former executive director of the state Republican Party. So a lot of these are really well-known names here. And then it's understood that Harvey Yates was who was chair of the Republican Party from 2009 to 2010, was expected to sign, but it sounds like he did not.
Gotcha.
But he did not, I
Interesting.
should say. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty much a who's who in New Mexico Republican politics. I mean, not literally everyone, but those are some pretty well-known names here.
That's a good point, Sophie. These aren't, underlings in some far-flung county that had to get talked into something unknowingly. And Ed, I was watching something on one of the national cable shows the other night. People need to realize these are serious charges that come with them 4 to 5 year sentences for falsifying things on federal documents. This is not just like forging, something for your kid's PTA class or a field trip. This is serious business. How should we as citizens think about this?
Well, this was an assault on our democracy. I mean,
Right.
I think, I'd love to get more information. And I know that that's what the January 6th Commission is doing, is trying to get answers. Who was behind it? Who was the puppet master? And this appears to be part of a broader conspiracy that if we start to connect the dots, this piece of the electoral votes may have just been one component piece of a broader plan. What role did the January 6th riots, were those in some way somehow connected to this master plan? And when did this start? The information that I'm hearing is it started right after the election results. As soon as Biden was announced the winner, there was a plan that was put into motion. And if that's the case, there needs to be some level of accountability. If we take our democracy seriously, there must be accountability. And for those local, since it's touched us locally, I like to hear more. Right now, they've just been subpoenaed to answer questions, and once they respond to the subpoenas and answer some of the questions the committee might have, it may shed a little more light as to what's going on. But as you said, Gene, it is a criminal act. And what will happen as a result of the action that this group of individuals took. One of the members was mentioned that he has no regrets. Well, I wonder if there are federal charges applied, whether some of those regrets might start to seep in. And we need to take this issue very, very seriously. Our democracy is at stake.
I was very surprised by that quote. I'll tell you honestly, I thought that was like getting way out in front of it. And Rebecca, I've got to ask, a lot of Republicans think Donald Trump won that election. And so I got to ask, is this possibly going to have some bounce in our roundhouse and on decorum? Because a lot of people feel very seriously about this, that it was stolen and they're just not going to move one way or the other. Any bounce you can anticipate from this?
I'm not sure about bounce, but it's definitely playing very heavily in the leading up to the Republican primary for our governor's race. And
Gotcha.
you really, if you're gonna win as a Republican in New Mexico, you've got to do so as a Trump ally. You can't separate from Trump even still, and then expect to win the Republican vote. I will say that I will be very curious in watching this because the 7 states that participated, it almost is this. I feel like there will be some sort of a statement that says like, oh no, you guys have this all wrong. That's not what we were trying to do, because it almost was like, the fact that every state has their own style of, what they send, and these 7 states sent a template letter that all looked the same, just changed out the names. Of course it would come to light. Of course they were going to get caught. And so it doesn't feel like something that is so masterfully planned where they all met in secrecy, on the same day and did all these things. That they would always just use a copycat.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. How interesting. Sophie, I'll give you the last word on this. We get about 20 seconds. Of course, I have a feeling this could be way bigger for the Republican Party in New Mexico than folks are realizing. This thing could rage like a wildfire, considering who is, involved in the charges, as Ed mentioned, yet to come down. Should folks be nervous here?
Well, I mean, here's the question, right? Given the current political environment, what we've seen over the last however many years, is this a badge of honor or dishonor within the Republican Party? And I think that's going to say a lot about, about the future of our democracy in New Mexico, in the country as a whole. I think it is very much the case that in many parts of the Republican Party, many sectors, right on. Let's keep doing this. This looks great. And so it's very hard at this moment to predict what the outcome is going to be.
Fair enough. A lot of push and pull going on there.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again to our line panel. Awesome stuff as always. Now this week, be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics we covered on our show this week. Go to Facebook, Twitter, or our Instagram pages.
Hey, all of us here at New Mexico PBS want to wish Senator Ben Ray Lujan a speedy recovery. As you know, he suffered what turned out to be a stroke when he checked himself into the hospital in Santa Fe after not feeling well. But you know what? Good on the senator. By listening to his body and acting, his own actions are a large reason why his prognosis for a full recovery is actually pretty promising. It's really good news. But in addition, what the senator demonstrated for all of us is a keen awareness of the signs of a stroke. And in case you don't know this, it's known as FAST, F-A-S-T. And what that means is face drooping for F, arm weakness for A, speech difficulty for S, and time to call 911 for T, F-A-S-T. This time last year, UNM Health opened their stroke center, and I had the chance to discuss at length how stroke impacts all of us with representatives from UNMH, and we are blessed to have them here in our state because, folks, every 4 minutes in our country, someone dies from a stroke. From 795,000 strokes that happen across our country. In fact, UNMH handled 400 cases last year locally. Stroke prevention through better health is the best start, no matter what age. And keep in mind, Senator Lujan is only 48 years old. If you'd like to see that interview, and I promise you, you'll learn something, head to our Focus on New Mexico Facebook page, and the full interview is there. Thanks again for joining us. We're staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.